When I first saw her baby, I felt my heart twist in a way I couldn't explain. Not because of jealousy, not even because I wanted one of my own, but because for a fleeting second, something in that child's face felt familiar. Her name was Tasha, my best friend since college. We'd been through everything together: heartbreaks, late night study sessions, even sharing the same cramped apartment with a leaky roof in our 20s. When I married David, she stood beside me as my maid of honor, crying louder than my own mother during the vows. That's how close we were. So when she had her baby, a beautiful caramel-skinned boy with deep brown eyes, I was right there in the hospital room, holding her hand as she pushed through tears and pain. "I can't believe you're finally a mom," I whispered, brushing her damp hair from her forehead. She smiled weakly, eyes heavy but glowing. "You've always been my sister, May." "You'll be auntie to this one," I laughed. "You don't even have to ask." Back then, everything seemed right. I had my husband, my home, my career as a school counselor. Tasha had her baby and a small apartment not too far from ours. We'd talk every day, sharing little updates about sleepless nights, baby milestones, new recipes, and the latest gossip from our old friend group. I'd bring over casseroles when she was too tired to cook. She'd drop by my house just to chat while I folded laundry. It was the kind of friendship people envy. Easy, effortless, safe. Or so I thought. Looking back now, there were tiny cracks I ignored. Little things that didn't make sense at the time, like how Tasha always lit up a little too brightly when David came home early, or how she'd find excuses to stay longer when he was around, pretending she needed advice on home repairs or paperwork. But David had always been kind, polite to everyone, especially my friends. I never thought much of it. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't come as a thunderstorm. It drips in slowly, like water seeping through a ceiling, until one day you look up and realize the whole roof has caved in. But before all that, before the pain and the shouting and the silence that followed, there was laughter. There were Sunday brunches where Tasha would hold her baby while I poured orange juice, and David would tease me for burning the pancakes again. There was warmth in the kitchen, sunlight spilling through the curtains, the smell of maple syrup in the air. Moments that felt like family, the kind you believe will last forever. Tasha didn't talk much about the baby's father. She said it had been a mistake, that he wasn't ready, that she didn't want to drag him into something he didn't want. I didn't push her. I figured if she wanted to tell me, she would, in her own time. I respected that. Still, I remember the first time David held her baby. It was at our place. She'd come over one Friday evening with a diaper bag and exhaustion written all over her face. David picked up the little boy, bouncing him gently while humming under his breath. "Hey there, little man," he said softly, smiling. Tasha just watched them, quiet. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes glistening with something I couldn't name. Pride? Sadness? Guilt? Whatever it was, it passed so quickly I told myself I imagined it. Weeks turned into months. The baby grew, and so did our lives. But I began to feel off balance. David started coming home later, claiming extra shifts or work dinners. Tasha became more distant, texting less, avoiding eye contact when I dropped by. I chalked it up to new motherhood stress. That's what good wives do. We explain away the uneasy things. We trust. We keep the peace. One Sunday afternoon, about 6 months after the baby was born, I found myself watching them from the kitchen window. Tasha and David, outside in our backyard during our usual cookout. He was holding the baby again, bouncing him while she laughed at something he said. The air was warm, heavy with the smell of charcoal and ribs. But as I watched, something in me tightened. The way she looked at him. The way he avoided looking back too quickly. It was like watching two actors who'd forgotten the camera was still rolling. I tried to shake it off. "You're overthinking," I told myself. "You're tired, that's all." But that night, when David came to bed, I noticed he smelled faintly of baby powder. Not cologne, not smoke, not the outside air. Baby powder. "Were you holding him again?" I asked quietly. Yeah, he murmured, half asleep. He likes me, I guess. He liked him. Of course he did. It would be weeks before I understood just how deep that liking ran. But for now, I convinced myself it was innocent. Because when you love someone, your husband, your best friend, you don't look for the storm. You build your life assuming the sun will always come back out. And I didn't see it coming. Not the lie. Not the betrayal. Not the moment that would split my world into before and after. They say a woman's intuition whispers long before it screams. I wish I had listened to those whispers. It started small, things I could easily dismiss if I wanted to. And at first I did. One afternoon, I stopped by Tasha's place unannounced, carrying a pot of stew I'd made, chicken and okra, her favorite. The baby was asleep in his crib, his little chest rising and falling softly. Tasha looked startled when she opened the door. May, I wasn't expecting you. I figured I'd bring you lunch, I said, stepping inside. You look tired. Her apartment smelled faintly of baby lotion and lavender, but something else lingered too. A trace of cologne. Not the cheap kind. Familiar. I frowned. David has that same cologne. You two have the same taste. I joked lightly, setting the pot on her counter. Tasha froze for just a second. Oh, really? I wouldn't know, she murmured, busying herself with the dishes. It was such a tiny thing, but that hesitation, it stayed with me. A few days later, David came home late again. He dropped his jacket on the chair, loosened his tie, and gave me a tired smile. Long day? I asked, pouring him a cup of coffee. The longest. Traffic was a nightmare. He kissed my forehead and walked past, but as he did, I caught that same scent. Faint lavender mixed with something powdery, like baby lotion. I wanted to ask, have you been at Tasha's? But the words stuck in my throat. Why accuse someone you love when you have no proof? Only feelings? Still, once doubt finds a home in your heart, it never sleeps. It lingers, waiting for the smallest reason to wake again. The following weekend, Tasha called, asking if I could watch her baby for a few hours. Of course, I said, glad to help. She sounded nervous on the phone, like she was choosing every word too carefully. When she arrived, she looked flustered, her eyes red. Rough night? I asked. Yeah, she said softly, just tired. I took the baby. His soft cooing always calmed me, and something inside me melted. He looked up at me with those big brown eyes, so trusting. His tiny hand gripped my finger. And then, I noticed it. A small birthmark just below his left ear. The shape of a teardrop. It hit me like a shiver. David had the same mark, almost identical. I'd kissed that spot on his neck 1,000 times. I laughed it off because that's what denial does. It dresses up fear in the clothes of coincidence. But as the baby giggled, that mark stared back at me like an accusation. That night, I lay awake beside David, staring at the ceiling. My mind ran wild. Number. It couldn't be. Not Tasha. Not him. Not after all these years. I tried to push it down, to bury it under chores and routine, but truth has a strange way of resurfacing, usually when you least want it to. One afternoon, I drove to Tasha's again, this time to drop off some diapers and a few baby clothes I'd picked up on sale. She wasn't home, but her neighbor, Miss Clara, an older woman who loved to talk, was sweeping the porch. She's gone out, Miss Clara said. Left about an hour ago. That nice man picked her up again? I blinked. What man? Oh, you know, the tall one. Drives a gray car. Always polite, always helps her with the groceries. My chest tightened. Gray car? Like a gray sedan? She nodded. Mm-hmm. Handsome, too. Said hello to me once. David, I think. I remember standing there, the world spinning a little, my lips trembling. I managed to smile politely, thank her, and walk away before my knees gave out. Back in the car, my hands shook on the steering wheel. I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror, at the woman who looked calm but was cracking from the inside. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe David was just being kind, helping. That's who he was, right? But my heart knew better. It always had. That evening, when David came home, I asked softly, "Did you see Tasha today?" He didn't look up from his phone. "Tasha?" "No, why?" "Just asking," I said, forcing a smile. He kissed my cheek, but I could feel the distance, the lie wrapped in the softness of routine. Over the next few days, I became an observer in my own life, watching him, watching her, noticing how her texts came at odd hours, how he'd turn his phone face down when it buzzed at dinner, how he started shaving more often, wearing that cologne I hadn't seen him use in months. It wasn't until I saw the photo that everything fell apart. I was scrolling through social media one night when Tasha posted a picture of her baby, smiling, chubby cheeks, wrapped in a blanket. But what caught my attention wasn't the baby. It was the background. A painting on the wall. The same painting that hung in our guest room. The photo had been taken in my house. I stared at it, my heart hammering. The caption read, "Our favorite place to nap after a long day. Hour." I zoomed in, searching for clues I already knew were there. The edge of our living room sofa, the curtains I'd chosen myself. That night, I waited until David was asleep. Then I went through his phone. I'd never done it before. But something inside me said I had to see for myself. And there it was. Messages from Tasha. Photos, heart emojis, late-night conversations. My hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped the phone. The last message read, "He's growing fast. You should see him tomorrow. He misses his daddy." I couldn't breathe. My husband, my best friend, their baby. The words blurred before my eyes and a sound escaped me. Half laugh, half sob. I remember walking outside, barefoot, standing in the cold night air. The world was quiet except for the faint hum of traffic and the sound of my own heartbeat. It felt like everything I'd built, my marriage, my friendships, my sense of self, had cracked open all at once. And yet, beneath all that pain, there was a strange stillness, a calm before the storm I knew was coming. Because now that I knew the truth, someone was going to have to face it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching David breathe, the faint rhythm of his chest rising and falling. Steady, peaceful, guilty. Every few minutes, I'd look back at his phone, the messages still glowing faintly like tiny flames burning holes through my chest. "He misses his daddy." The words echoed over and over. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to throw things or beg for an explanation. I just wanted the truth. Spoken, naked, undeniable. The next morning, David woke to find me sitting at the dining table with his phone in my hand. The sunlight poured in through the blinds, striping his face with lines of gold and shadow. He blinked, confused. "May? What are you doing with my—" "Don't lie," I said quietly. My voice surprised even me. It was calm. Too calm. I read everything, his face drained of color. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then rubbed a hand over his jaw. "May, How long?" I asked. He swallowed. "Please, let me—" "How? Long?" The silence that followed was heavier than any words. He finally looked at me and his eyes said everything. "It was one night," he whispered. "Just once. Before she knew she was pregnant. Before I even understood what it meant." I laughed, but it came out brittle. "One night. And that one night gave her a baby." He flinched. "I didn't know, May. I swear to you, I didn't know until later." "Until when?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew, and you said nothing." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing like a caged animal. What was I supposed to do? Tell you I made the biggest mistake of my life? That I hurt the two women I care about most? I stared at him, disbelief cutting through the numbness. Care about? You care about me? About her? You ruined both our lives and you're talking about care? He sank into the chair across from me, his face buried in his hands. I swear to God, it didn't mean anything, May. I was drunk. She was upset. You were out of town for that conference, and it just happened. I wanted to hate him, but my mind flashed back to those days. How I'd been away for a school event. How Tasha had called me that weekend saying she felt lonely. How I'd asked David to check in on her. The puzzle pieces fit together like knives. I stood up slowly. You didn't just betray me. You used my kindness to do it. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. His touch felt foreign now. Tainted. May, please, don't leave me, I didn't answer. I just turned away because sometimes silence speaks louder than rage ever could. I called Tasha that afternoon. My voice trembled, but I kept it steady. Hey, I said. Can you come by? I need to talk to you. There was a pause on the other end. Of course. Is everything okay? No, I said simply. But it will be. She arrived within the hour, wearing that soft pink sweater she always wore when she wanted to seem harmless. I watched her from the kitchen as she walked in, her eyes darting nervously around. Where's David? She asked carefully. Gone, I said. For now. I gestured toward the dining table. She hesitated before sitting down, her fingers clutching her purse like it might protect her. I saw the messages, I said flatly. She went still. No words, just a faint tremor in her lips. I waited, giving her the chance to say something. Anything. Finally, she whispered, May, I never meant for you to find out like this. Find out like this? I repeated, my voice breaking. There's no right way to find out your best friend had your husband's child, Tasha. Tears filled her eyes. It was a mistake. We were drunk. Stop. I held up my hand. Don't give me the same line he did. She blinked, realizing he'd already confessed. He told you? Yes. He told me everything, or at least what was left of the truth. She broke then, sobbing, shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. For a moment, I just watched her, numb. Once upon a time, I would have held her. Now, I couldn't even look at her without feeling my stomach twist. I didn't mean to hurt you, she cried. I swear I didn't. I wanted to tell you, but every time I looked at you, I saw what I'd done. I saw the only real friend I ever had, and I couldn't face that. You could face my husband, though, I said quietly. Her sobs deepened, the sound raw and ugly. May, please, I'll do anything. Do anything? I repeated. Then tell me one thing. When you named your son, did you ever think about what that name would sound like in my mouth? She looked up, confused. I swallowed hard. I used to imagine my own baby with that name. The one David and I talked about. The one we never had. Her face crumpled, and for a brief, bitter second, I saw the friend I used to love buried under the woman who'd destroyed everything. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, I said, my voice trembling but firm. Because forgiveness isn't something you get to ask for yet. I stood up, the chair scraping the floor. I want you out of my life, Tasha. Completely. You and David both. I don't care how you handle that baby's future, but you will not handle mine. She nodded through tears, clutching her purse like it could hold her broken pieces together. At the door, she turned back once. He loves you, May. Even now, I laughed bitterly. If that's love, I want no part of it. When the door shut behind her, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of every memory we'd shared, every laugh, every whispered secret. And it hurt worse than any scream could have. That night, I packed a bag and left the house. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay in that place filled with ghosts. His toothbrush by the sink, her perfume still clinging to the air from that day she'd stopped by. I drove until the city lights blurred into darkness and the highway stretched on like an escape I hadn't earned yet. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not just for what I'd lost, but for the woman I'd been before betrayal taught me how fragile trust really is. I checked into a small inn on the edge of town that night, the kind of place that smelled faintly of old wood and lemon polish, where the walls carried the soft hum of other people's pain. The woman at the front desk didn't ask questions. She just handed me the key and said, "Room 6, second floor." When I closed the door behind me, the silence pressed in. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in the clothes I'd worn all day, staring at my phone as if it might give me direction. David called 5 times that night. I didn't answer once. His texts came next, short at first, then longer. "May, please, let's talk, I can explain. You're the love of my life. I messed up, but don't give up on us." I turned the phone face down and let it buzz until the battery died. For the first time in years, I slept without his voice beside me. And despite the ache in my chest, I slept deeply. When morning came, I opened the curtains and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of gold and violet. It should have been beautiful, but it felt hollow. I realized then that heartbreak doesn't always look like crying on the floor. Sometimes it's just silence. Heavy, steady silence. Over the next week, I avoided everyone. I took unpaid leave from work, turned off my phone, and drove aimlessly. I stopped at roadside diners and pretended to be just another traveler. Nobody knew my story there. Nobody saw the woman behind the polite smile. But pain has a way of following you. Every reflection in a diner window, every love song on the radio, every baby cooing in the next booth. It all found a way to remind me. By the third night, I stopped trying to outrun it. I sat in my car outside a grocery store, the hum of the engine low, and let the truth settle. I couldn't change what they'd done, but I could decide what I'd do next. That realization didn't feel like strength. It felt like survival. When I finally returned home, David was waiting. The porch light was on, and he was sitting on the steps like a man waiting for his sentence. His face looked drawn, eyes red from sleepless nights. He stood when he saw me. "May." I didn't stop walking. I opened the door and went inside. He followed, hesitant, like he knew one wrong word could shatter whatever thread still held us together. "I'll leave if you want me to," he said quietly. "But please let me say something first." I didn't look at him. "You've said enough." "I know," he whispered. "I know I don't deserve a word. But I need you to understand that it wasn't about you. It was about me, my weakness, my selfishness. I've spent every day since hating myself for what I did." I turned to face him, finally meeting his eyes. "And what about the child, David? You going to hate yourself every time you see him?" His lips trembled. "He's innocent. He didn't ask for this. That's the only thing we agree on," I said. We stood in silence for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked loud enough to fill the room. Finally, I spoke again. "I don't know what our marriage means anymore," I said slowly. "But I do know what I mean. I'm not the woman who waits for an apology to rebuild her worth." He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the man I used to love vanish beneath the weight of his own regret. "I'll move out," he said softly. "If that's what you want. It's what I need," I replied. He nodded, tears in his eyes. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to comfort him. The house felt emptier after he left. His things were gone within days. The cologne, the extra toothbrush, the hum of his voice in the morning. Even the bed felt too big. But emptiness can also be space. Space to breathe, to heal, to start over. I filled my days with quiet rituals. Morning tea by the window. Evening walks around the block. Cooking for one. Each act a small rebellion against the pain that had tried to consume me. I didn't hear from Tasha for weeks. Then, One afternoon, she appeared at my door, her baby, their baby, in her arms. I froze, torn between anger and pity. She looked thinner, her eyes hollowed from sleepless nights. "I won't stay long," she said softly. I just needed to say this face to face. I crossed my arms, waiting. "I'm sorry, May," she said. "I know those words mean nothing now. But I need you to know I left town. I can't raise him here. Not like this, surrounded by reminders. I'll make sure he grows up knowing the truth when the time comes. But I need to give both of us a chance to heal." I stared at the child, his tiny fingers clutching her sweater, his eyes impossibly like David's. And for the first time, instead of hatred, I felt something else. Sadness. Not for her. For the boy. For what none of this was his fault. "Take care of him," I said quietly. "Make sure he never feels the weight of what you did." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're a better woman than I deserve." When she left, I stood at the window, watching her walk down the path, her small figure fading into the late afternoon light. It felt like closing a chapter I hadn't realized was still open. The months that followed were slow but steady. I started therapy. I went back to work. My colleagues never asked questions, but I could see the compassion in their eyes. I found comfort in helping others heal. Somehow, their stories made my own pain less isolating. And somewhere along the line, I rediscovered myself. The woman who laughed too loud at old sitcoms, who sang along to the radio while driving, who found peace in solitude. Healing didn't come with fireworks. It came quietly, like spring after a long winter, one green sprout at a time. Sometimes I still dream of the life I thought I had. Of Tasha's laughter, of David's warmth before it turned cold. But when I wake, I remind myself that losing them wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of me. The first time I stepped back into church after everything, I could feel the whispers before I heard them. It was a small town, the kind of place where secrets traveled faster than prayers. I'd been gone for months, and though no one said it out loud, I could feel their eyes tracing the outline of my story. The woman whose husband fathered another woman's child. I walked down the aisle anyway, chin high, wearing my Sunday best. Burgundy cardigan, cream blouse, the same one I'd worn the day my world fell apart. Maybe I did that on purpose. Maybe I needed to remind myself how far I'd come since that day. When the pastor saw me, his voice faltered for half a second before he smiled and said, "It's good to see you again, Sister May." The choir began to sing, and I took my seat. My hands trembled, but not from shame. From release. For months I had hidden, carried the burden of their mistakes in silence. But standing there, I realized something powerful. I hadn't done anything wrong, and shame only survives in silence. After the service, a few women approached me, the same ones who used to gossip at bake sales and choir practice. "May, you've been missed," one said, her voice soft, but her eyes searching. "How have you been holding up?" I smiled. Not the brittle kind I'd worn before, but something real. "Better than I expected," I said. The woman nodded slowly. "You're strong, May. I don't think I could have survived what you went through." "You don't know what you can survive until you have to," I replied. That line stayed with her, I could tell. Maybe it even silenced a rumor or two. A few weeks later, I ran into David at the grocery store. He was in the cereal aisle, holding a box like he didn't recognize it. His hair was a little grayer, his shoulders lower. He turned and froze when he saw me. "May." "David." An awkward silence filled the space between us, the kind that used to be filled with shared grocery lists and quiet laughter. "You look good," he said, and it wasn't a lie. I did look good, not because of makeup or clothes, but because peace had found its way back to me. "I'm doing all right," I said simply. He nodded, swallowing hard. "I wanted to call, but I didn't want to disturb your healing." "You made enough noise already," I said, a small edge in my voice. Then I softened. but I appreciate the thought. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I still love you, May. I took a breath, the kind that clears the chest before truth comes out. And I loved you once too, David, but love isn't enough when trust is gone. He nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. I understand. When he walked away, I didn't feel anger, just clarity. Some endings don't come with fire or screaming, just a quiet acceptance that the story is over. One evening, I hosted a small dinner with my sister, a few close friends, and my neighbors, the ones who'd checked in on me without judgment. We ate roasted chicken, cornbread, and greens, and for the first time in months, I laughed. A real deep laugh that shook something loose in my chest. Halfway through dinner, my sister raised her glass. "To May," she said, "for proving that grace doesn't mean weakness." Everyone clinked glasses, and I felt tears rise, not from sadness, but gratitude. I realized then that I wasn't the same woman who had sat at that kitchen table with a folded letter in her hands. That woman had been broken. This one had built herself back up from the pieces. Weeks turned into months, and I started sharing bits of my story. Not for sympathy, but for connection. I spoke at a women's group one evening. My hands trembled at first, but once I started talking, the words poured out like they'd been waiting for release. "I thought betrayal would destroy me," I said, my voice steady. "But it taught me something I never knew before, that I was capable of surviving without anyone's permission." When I finished, women in the room were crying, not because of what I lost, but because of what I found. My voice. One woman stood and said, "You just told my story too." And in that moment, I knew that pain, when shared, could become purpose. A year later, on a quiet spring morning, I visited my mother's grave. I brought daisies, her favorite. Standing there, I whispered, "Mama, I made it." I thought about the legacy of women in my family. Strong, quiet, forgiving to a fault. But I decided I'd add something new to that legacy. Boundaries. As I turned to leave, a breeze passed through the trees, soft and warm. It felt like a blessing. Now, when I look back, I don't see just betrayal. I see rebirth. I see a woman who lost everything she thought she needed, only to find herself. Some nights I still sit at that same kitchen table, the one where it all began. But this time there's no folded letter in my hand. Just a cup of tea, the sound of my own steady breathing, and a heart that finally feels whole. And maybe one day, love will find me again. But if it doesn't, that's all right. Because I've learned the most powerful kind of love there is, the kind you give yourself.
It's strange, isn't it? How silence can sound so different once peace moves in. There was a time when silence used to scare me, when I'd fill it with noise, the hum of the TV, the clatter of dishes, the sound of my own thoughts trying to make sense of everything that went wrong. But now, silence feels like music, the kind that doesn't need words. Every morning, I wake up to sunlight spilling through my kitchen window, the same golden light that once fell across that folded letter. Except now, it doesn't look like a reminder of pain. It looks like forgiveness. Not the kind that excuses what was done, but the kind that frees me from carrying it any longer. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about letting yourself move on. A few months ago, I ran into Tasha again. It was at the park, of all places. She was sitting on a bench, her little boy, their little boy, playing in the grass with a toy truck. For a moment, I froze. My chest tightened the way it used to, like grief had crept back in to remind me it still knew my name. But then the wind shifted, and I remembered. I wasn't that woman anymore. I walked over slowly. She saw me before I spoke, her eyes wide, then soft. "May," she said quietly. "Tasha." For a long time, neither of us said a word. The sound of the child's laughter filled the space between us. He was growing fast, curls bouncing, cheeks full of life. "He's beautiful," I said finally. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. He's got your kindness. That caught me off guard. My kindness? She looked down. You could have hated me forever. I wouldn't have blamed you, but here you are, still standing, still smiling. I sat beside her. Tasha, what happened between us? It broke something I can't fix. But I've learned that carrying that hate, it only breaks what's left of me. She wiped her face. I'm so sorry, May. I was lost. I was lonely. I didn't think about who I was hurting. I nodded slowly. I believe you. But apology doesn't erase the past. It just means we both finally stopped pretending it didn't happen. For a moment, she looked relieved, maybe even lighter. We sat there watching her son chase butterflies, and I felt something I hadn't in years, peace. I didn't need to love her again. I didn't even need to trust her, but forgiving her, that was for me. When I got home that night, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, the same place where this story began. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been, the trusting wife, the loyal friend, the heartbroken woman, the angry survivor, and finally, the healed one. Each version had its purpose. Each one brought me closer to the woman I am now. Sometimes, people ask me how I managed to forgive after what they did. And I tell them this: you don't wake up one morning and decide to forgive. It happens in tiny pieces. Every time you choose not to let the past ruin your present. Every time you take a deep breath instead of lashing out. Every time you see the person who hurt you and your first thought isn't hate but freedom. That's forgiveness. It's quiet, it's personal, and it's powerful. I started a small support circle for women at my church. We meet once a month in the same fellowship hall where I used to help organize potlucks. We sit in a circle, tell our stories, laugh, cry, sometimes pray. And every time someone new joins, I tell them what I wish someone had told me. Your pain may have broken you, but it didn't end you. There is something sacred about watching another woman realize that truth for the first time, the way her shoulders drop, the way her breathing changes, the way she finally looks up instead of down. It's like watching the sunrise in human form. Now, I don't spend my days wondering why it happened anymore. Because sometimes closure isn't about answers. It's about acceptance. Maybe I had to lose the people I love most to find the person I was meant to become. Maybe God let it all fall apart so I could rebuild something better myself. When I look back, I don't just see betrayal and heartbreak. I see a woman who refused to let bitterness define her, who turned her pain into power, who learned that endings can also be beginnings in disguise. And if you're listening to this, maybe sitting in your own kind of quiet heartbreak, let me tell you something I learned the hard way. You will laugh again. You will love again. You will wake up one morning, look in the mirror, and not see what they did to you, but who you became because of it. Because healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without hurting. As I finish this story, I glance toward the window, the late afternoon sun painting my kitchen in gold. The light catches on the lace curtains, and for a moment, everything feels like a movie I've already lived through. Only this time, I'm not the woman waiting for the next storm. I'm the woman who became the calm after it, and that right there, that's my freedom.